I am so very blessed to have with me four exemplary brothers who have been fundamentally concerned about one of the most crucial issues often overlooked and underplayed in the history of this country, which has been the plight of Black farmers. We have a variety of different voices, a variety of different perspectives that zero in on the scope and depth of the injustice, what has been attempted, and various efforts, often too inadequate, but still bouncing back, trying to ensure that truth and justice reign and truth and justice prevail. We know, in fact, the history of the very, very ugly white supremacist subjugation, marginalization, discrimination against the heroic Black farmers. And I want to say on a personal note that my great-grandfather was one of the great Black farmers in Louisiana, who had struggles over his land year in and year out. So this is a very personal issue, but of course, for all of us, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation, no matter what section of the nation, this is a moral issue. For me as a Christian, it's a spiritual issue. And as citizens, it is a civic issue. And so I hope that you all are able to spend some good time as you open your hearts, minds, and souls to the marvelous voices of these four brothers who have played crucial roles, historic roles, in trying to hold up the bloodstained banner of the struggle for justice of Black farmers in the United States and especially in the South. Brother Bryce, I'm gonna turn it right over to you and you introduce our dear brothers, and then we're gonna jump right into it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. West, and thank you for joining us. So my name is Bryce Stuckey, and I'm a journalist and researcher, and I've worked on Black farmer issues for the past several years, especially with Lawrence. And so, Lawrence, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Lawrence Lucas, President Emeritus of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees. The organization was founded in 1994 because of the need for addressing the abuse and the racism at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We started as an employee organization, but soon after that, we began to get involved with the Black farmer issue and the many demonstrations and what have you. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I spent many of my summers with my grandparents in Virginia on a farm, so I have a connection and understand and know how difficult it is to farm and the difficulty to farm without the abuse that goes on within the Department of Agriculture. I was able to spend time in Ethiopia for 5 years as a photographer. I spent many years studying and going on to get a master's degree at the University of District of Columbia. Went on to University of Southern Cal the following year. They let me in there, and they really indoctrinated me on the social, the intellectual part that was absent in my education. But let me say this. One thing that has brought me to this point today is the institutional racism and sexism and other abuses at USDA. Not only do they discriminate against farmers, they discriminate against women, they abuse women. And we have worked very diligently over the years with the women in California and brought about a settlement. Not because the U.S. Department of Agriculture wanted to fix the problem. We had to go into court, and we demonstrated in California, we demonstrated in Washington many times, and we've fortunate to have many times demonstrating with us is Michael Stovall. Understand. And the one thing that we need to point out is to address not just the problem with farmers, but in order to change the system as USDA, you've got to do something about the institutional piece. We don't want to put a Band-Aid on a cancer. We want the assistance and we want the American people to understand that this racist department has been in its existence and has been taking land and taking the wealth base from Black farmers. And we are three people, including Nate Rosenberg and Suki. We're in this battle, and we want to help you, Dr. West, and all your colleagues to do something about this very serious problem of the institutional racism at the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Michael Stovall, Black farmer here in Town Creek, Alabama. I'm the fourth generation of farmers. I have a finding of discrimination and breach of settlement agreement. I've been on this movement for 30 years. I was 29 years old when I first got discriminated against the USDA. Also, I'm one of the presidents of the Independent Black Farmers. I also run a nonprofit organization, Cooperative Agriculture for Minorities. It's a systemic racism that the USDA and everybody goes along to get along. We have so many people has been sold out because people get money under the table to ignore the true problem of the Black farmers and how much land they have lost and how much suffering they have endured. So I'm here today to try to make a difference in my situation and many farmers that's out there that's depending on me to help make a difference in their lives and bring some social justice to the situation that's going on in America that's facing all Black farmers, losing land taken wrongly, and so many other things that's happening in their lives, causing health problems because of discrimination. When you endure this pain and suffering for 30 years, that's a long time to endure. It causes mental illness and so many other problems that you occurred because of not able to move your farming operation to the next level because of discrimination. They put me in jail, brought me up on erroneous charges, and I beat all that with a finding of discrimination and breach of settlement agreement. So it's ongoing discrimination for me and many farmers outside of me, and many farmers have died in the pain and suffering of trying to get something done on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Wayman, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Wayman Henson. Briefly, in terms of background, I was born and raised in rural Southeast Texas, which is the South, because the South does not know boundary lines between Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. So I'm one generation removed from the farm on one side and two generations on another side of white farmers. Class of 1982 at Ole Miss, so know something about education in the state of Mississippi. 10 years in ministry, 26 years in the academy, 8 years with an American Indian tribe, and have been retired since 2016. My involvement with the Black Farmer movement began in 1994 and has taken various faces and directions from that point to now. In the 94 to 99 window, I was a hired gun or expert witness for 4 of the first 15 Black farmers who settled their cases with DOJ and USDA. And when I say settled, we have to put quotation marks around that because that's a really long, sordid piece of the story there. But was involved in that, went on the farm, lived with the farmers for days at a time, wrote lots of documents, a lot of papers, and appeared in one mediation hearing, and then several other things since then. So been involved at the level of board membership with BIFA out of North Carolina, have been an active participant at the invitation of Lawrence Lucas with the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees and the Justice for Black Farmers. Have a couple of modest publications in this area, have huge databases around the area that Michael has mentioned. A burden that I carry is the burden of what policy does to the health and well-being of farmers. And so what I'm doing now is combing through piles and piles of pages of interviews, looking at macroaggressions, and we know what that is, and looking at microaggressions, which is what Black farmers face anytime they walked into the door of the FSA. The latest thing that we've done, you have access to the trailer, a documentary that Sean Hill and I put together, 9 of the first 15 farmers who settled their stories in their own words. And that film has been out since 2020, and hope you'll be able to take a look at it. So happy to be here, happy to be a participant and an ally in this struggle to make things right for Black farmers, such as Michael and our friends around the country. So thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Wayman. So does anyone else want to comment? And if not, I'm going to launch into a short history of Black landowning and loss in the US. Okay, I'll get into it. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the history of Black landowners in America. I'm going to go back to colonial times, but I'll speed up and mostly talk about post-Civil War. To preface this material, I want to read a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. He said, "The rise of a nation, the pressing forward of a social class, means a bitter struggle, a hard battle with the world, such as few of the more favored classes know or appreciate. Black people have owned land in America since at least the mid-1600s. Many of the earliest landowners were descended from mixed-race couples in Virginia's Eastern Shore. These families purchased land from Maryland to South Carolina. Several in North Carolina owned over 1,000 acres by the early 1700s. And descendants of these families settled as far away as Ohio, East Texas, and California. At the eve of the Civil War, there were about 20,000 free Black property owners. Many lived in the same areas that were settled by the earliest Black landowners, such as the Tidewater region in Virginia. The North had almost as many landowners as the South at this time. There were over 24 free Black towns in New Jersey, and these towns played a critical role in the Underground Railroad, demonstrating the social importance of Black land ownership. After the Civil War, there was a massive expansion of Black landowners. The number of rural owners more than tripled to 67,000 by 1870. By 1880, a full 20% of Black farmers already owned their farms. Du Bois estimates that Black-owned acreage increased from 3 million acres in 1875 to 12 million in 1900. By the early 1910s, to paraphrase the historian Manning Marable, Black people had acquired the largest amount of property they would ever own in the United States. A research team I work with estimates that Black people owned over 17 million acres at this time, probably a few million more than that. Black landowners provided the base for more developed economic activity in their communities. There were multiple Black-owned banks, Black agricultural colleges, and many small businesses at this time. There were prosperous Black settlements in every southern state. Even though white Southerners had led a bloody campaign against the Reconstruction governments, Black people still made efforts to assert their political rights. One of the most forceful such groups was the Colored Farmers Alliance, which had more than 2 million members at its peak in the 1890s. After this hopeful period, Black people began to lose land at a rapid rate. The New Deal struck a blow against them. Government payments went from 3 to 31% of farm income from 1929 to 1940. The Southern Bloc of the Democratic Party ensured this new money would be distributed in a way that maintained white supremacy. One such mechanism was the county committee, which, while nominally controlled by Democratic elections, was in practice always run by well-connected whites. Even though they were locked out of this system, Black farmers did not see their worst declines until the Civil Rights era. Many Southern civil rights leaders in the 50s and 60s were farm owners, since they were among the few Black people with independence from white employers. They ran NAACP chapters and sheltered activists, and so they had their land targeted by the white power structure who wanted to undermine their autonomy. In the mid-1960s, after the Voting Rights Act, civil rights activists ran campaigns to integrate the county committees. The white elite reacted by tampering with ballots and intimidating voters, thwarting the campaign. I want to give a brief example to illustrate how USDA undermined Black land ownership in this period. Norman Weathersby, a white car dealer in Mississippi, would force Black farmers to put up their land as collateral in exchange for loans. His friend, a USDA agent, would offer another loan to the same farmer, then delay its delivery. This caused the farmer to plant late, which meant they got a smaller harvest and less money than expected. They were then forced to give over their land to Weathersby to make up the difference. The AP found that Weathersby obtained over 700 Black-owned acres this way in the 50s and 60s. The turn of the century saw two federal settlements with Black farmers that have come to be known collectively as Pigford, after the plaintiff, Timothy Pigford. While Pigford was technically the largest civil rights settlement in history, most Black farmers say they are worse off now than they were before. Most claimants received only $50,000, not enough to buy a new tractor, while others received nothing. Meanwhile, a narrative that Pigford was rife with fraud that originated in Breitbart wound up in the New York Times. Black farmers say this narrative angered their white neighbors who thought Black farmers were getting lavish payouts. Representatives in Congress became uninterested in doing more for Black farmers who they thought had already been helped. USDA is still rife with discrimination. I will give an illustrative example. The Trump administration appointed a top manager from USDA's Legal Defense Office as director of the Civil Rights Office. While the Civil Rights Office is meant to guarantee a fair hearing for people who allege discrimination, the Legal Defense Office is meant to defend the department. This clear conflict of interest is why federal law mandates a firewall between the two offices. Yet Trump's appointment merely made explicit an overlap that goes back over a decade. All 19 civil rights employees, my co-author Nate Rosenberg and I interviewed about this, including two former civil rights directors, said on the record that the Legal Defense Office is still heavily involved in the Civil Rights Office's affairs. This is a problem that persists across Republican and Democratic administrations. Activists and farmers are still demanding that the government make restitution for the damage USDA has done. The Pigford debt needs to be relieved and the civil rights process overhauled. Black people need fair representation in the farm economy, something this country has always denied them. In other words, the hard battle continues. So I hope that that gives overview. It's a lot of history, but that's meant to kind of set the stage for the rest of the discussion. And if anyone wants to comment, let me know. Otherwise, Lawrence, I was wondering if you wanted to talk about the kind of the recent political work you've done with Elizabeth Warren and others, or whatever other topic you want to bring up.
Yes. I think it's very important to understand that we have worked very diligently and very hard at this since 1994. I met Michael Stovall sometime at a demonstration in front of USDA. It could have been at the Capitol. We're getting so old, we can't remember which one. But I think it is important to mention the fact that history of USDA has allowed, and its basic functions, has allowed the abuse to continue against Black farmers. We know, for one, the county committee system, which is a process that allows individuals in rural America to make decisions on the lives and destiny of Black farmers. They can cease and desist in terms of making sure that Black farmers do not get the same programs and resources that white farmers get. We know that that the Pratt and Crit report during the Clinton administration identified this problem as one of the problems that we have then and we have now. At the turn of the century, we've lost acres of land. We've lost the wealth that comes with it. We are constantly confronted with a biased system that keeps farmers from being treated the same way as white farmers. And I think one of the individuals that know a great deal about this is Michael Stovall. And one of the things that the Clinton administration made sure was that when they did the Pratt and Crit reports, which was the Civil Rights Action Team reports and documents, they made sure that the farmers in their identification of one of the major problems is not air problem. The major problem is the racism that's embedded in the procedures and the processing at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When we talk with Elizabeth Warren, other candidates running for president last time, she was told that heirs property was the major reason why Black farmers are being discriminated against. We talked with her. She met with us and her staff many nights talking about what she can do. And please inform her of the mistake that she had made as it relates to the real problem at USDA. And the one thing that Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren did, she took on the responsibility of drafting the first piece of legislation and taking on this issue like no other has done since the Clinton administration. And let me say this, many times this administration, Tom Vilsack, who's now the secretary, will say that this administration is the best administration for Black farmers in its history. That is by far not true. The best administration was under the Clinton administration. The best administration was under the leadership of Michael Espy, who we in 1994 and 95 allowed us to organize and to help him to turn around USDA. These reports clearly indicate that the county committee system is one of the most reckless and racist bodies that is keeping Black farmers from being treated with the equally as white farmers and getting the programs and services as white farmers. And I would like for Michael, who knows a great deal about how farmers are being treated, I think he can probably address this issue from a farmer standpoint.
Dr. West, good evening again. This thing is so embedded, it's bigger than the county committee. It's the whole systemic problem of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Black farmers have lost over 16 million acres of land, and nobody wants to do anything about it. They want to give us crumbs. When Black farmers' wealth is over $326 billion, and they still want to throw crumbs at these farmers. And we got all these activists out here that's taking under the table money to be quiet so the real problem won't be noticed. This problem is so big and broad in this agency. It's more than the county committee. It's the loan officers. It's the agency itself that makes determination whether these farmers get a loan on time or not. Even if the loan is approved, even if the county committee make a ruling in favor of the farmer, it's still up to the loan officer to provide the money in a timely manner. So it's so big and broad across this government to take the land from Black farmers, and nobody wants to deal with it. Everybody wants to turn a deaf ear. We really need, Dr. West, this thing needs to be overhauled from the top to the bottom. And it's so corrupted and embedded, you just can't fix one piece. This has to be fixed, the whole entire agency. And one thing about this agency, these people need to be held accountable when they discriminate against these farmers and employees as well. If you employee, you come in there to do the right thing, they're gonna put you to side and they're gonna try to get rid of it. I have seen Black employees come in Lawrence County, Alabama, and be targeted because they want to go to lunch late, they're going to lunch early. And if they 5 minutes late, they hold them accountable for that 5 minutes because they want to get rid of them. I've seen those type of things go on in the agency. This is so embedded racism, and it goes from one family member to the next, and it's terrible. And I fought the Justice Department for allowing it to happen. This agency is so corrupt that is unbelievable. And all they want to do is take your land. When they take your wealth, they take your money, and they know that. Anything they can do is put their knees on a Black farmer's neck to take their land, and the Black farmers are suffering every day. If I can't get through the system, how in the world can anybody else? With a finding of discrimination and a breach of contract, they have took several thousand acres that I had potential to purchase. It was 732 acres in one tract, 150 in another tract, 156, 193 acres. So it's 97 acres. So it's several different farms, the chicken houses, they vandalize, hold up the lawns and keep me from getting in operation. I've seen so many farmers, then they put me in jail, brought me up on animal cruelty charges, shot and killed my cows and rustled my cows. So those are stories that I have. There's many farmers that have so many similar stories. They done everything but killed me, but they aged me. But I'm still here, and I'm standing on the back of other civil rights leaders that's gone on in, and other farmers that's rooting for change, for justice for all farmers. And I'm standing here for all farmers and all Black individuals that have suffered the pain of discrimination under the hands of the government or any other agency out there. So I beg of you to help fix this problem, because it's so embedded across the United States of America. It just only stopped in one county. It's the whole systemic problem with the U.S. Department of Agriculture that needs to be addressed. And I go back to the Justice Department. They're supposed to be the police of the United States. There is part of the problem because they get paid to undermine the Black farmers. Thank you so much.
Oh, indeed, indeed. Can I just jump in just a little bit, because all four of you all have been so powerful, but it just hits me so hard when you look at the different ways in which white supremacy in its vicious way and manners works and gets refashioned one generation after the other. I think about the Homestead Act of 1862. They got free land for some of the precious vanilla brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? I ain't got nothing against it out there, the 160 free acres homesteader. But then lo and behold, here in the South for Black folk, the 40 acres and a mule never came forward, never enacted, already a promise that was reneged on. And then as we emerge, we got Black farmers who have land, like James West, my great-great-grandfather. But then they come up with all kind of maneuvers and shenanigans to try to shrink his land less and less. And I know there's a larger story about agribusiness and the corporatization of agriculture and so forth, but that doesn't mean the white supremacy is not going on. And where do you go? You go to the US government. You think that the Department of Agriculture is going to actually be a source, a resort of fair treatment. And I'm glad you mentioned Brother Espy. He's out of Arkansas, right? Was he out of
Mississippi?
Mississippi. That's right. He's out of Mississippi. Even better, as much as I love Arkansas, I'll bring Mississippi, the Delta, with the blues. You know, we talking about Son House. We talking about Robert Johnson in there. See, but somebody like Espy, I'm glad you all lifted him, because it looks like he tried to be a counterforce against the dominant white supremacist forces. And he held on for a bit, but then lo and behold, new waves come through, fast talking folk come through, people posing and posturing, acting as if they are in genuine solidarity with Black farmers on the ground, but they get co-opted. They too often sell out, and you end up with folk getting treated even worse, as it were. Now, is it true? I was reading that Brother Ben Crump has a new, has a relatively new. Where are we on that in terms of the legal suit? Is that still operating?
No, the Justice Department pulled the plug on his class action suit, that it was not well planned.
Wow.
You're talking about Crump leading the Black farmer movement? Yeah. That was over and done with. That was an embarrassing thing, because that was not a well thought out
I
legal
remember all
procedure.
of the photo ops and everything. What was that, $300 and some billion, right?
It was huge. Right. Well, the thing that I would want to add to the mix, Dr. West, is that there has been a commitment on both sides of the fence with USDA. On the one hand, there has been an absolute lack of commitment to doing right by our Black American farmers. That's one thing that is Stuckey, Rosenberg, and others have really nailed that down for us. And then on the other hand, and so that has led to a plethora of complaints. On the other hand, within the Office of Civil Rights, the Office of Civil Rights has never been committed to resolving those complaints. For instance, President Reagan, who many of us revere, actually closed down the Office of Civil Rights in, I think, 1981. And then, lo and behold, when Trump comes along, he also dismantles the Office of Civil Rights, so that the current president has to spend millions of dollars reestablishing that particular office. And at the same time, that office is called the closing machine. We had a meeting a while back, a couple years ago now, with Vilsack and his staff, and the acting director of the Office of Civil Rights said that there were no open complaints within the Office of Civil Rights. And we knew that was a bald-faced lie, because we knew Black farmers who had complaints who were on the call with us, including Dwayne Goldman, who's Vilsack's right-hand man for equity. So it's like, how can you sit there and tell us face-to-face via Zoom call that there are no open, unclosed complaints within the Office of Civil Rights? So there has been a commitment to doing nothing. And that commitment to doing nothing actually goes back, I think, to Pickford 1 and Pickford 2. If you look through all of the data, there were 16,000 roughly successful complainants who were admitted to the class via track A, track B, blah, blah, blah. More details than you would want to know. But out of 16,000 successful complainants, Dr. West, only 371 got what they wanted, which was debt relief. They did not care about the $50,000 that was the carrot. What they wanted was what followed the carrot, debt relief. And so when Bryce said a moment ago that by and large, Black farmers are worse now after Pickford than before, that's exactly what I heard during the documentary. And one more thing that I would say, one thing that I noticed in my research as an expert witness on the one hand, and then a documentarian on the other hand, what I observed was that if you settled your case in 1997, there was a different number of dollars in your bank account than if you settled your case with them in 1999. Out of those 15 Black farmers who settled with the Fed. So if you settled your case earlier, you got a better settlement. And that was part of SB's doing right there. That was incredible. On the other hand, if you settle later, you got less dollars. And what I asked the former director of the Office of Civil Rights was, why was that? Why were they not all treated equitably? And he said, Office of General Counsel. So when they come along and say there's a firewall between OGC and OSCR, that's a bunch of crap. So when OSCR has the ability with their PIN to X out X number of dollars and half that or less than half that, you have the power of Office of General Counsel. That's one of the things that simply needs to be changed within the overall fabric, I think, of racism that is running through this 100,000 plus member agency. So that is a huge overhaul that would take place. But I think you can move people around from room to room, place to place. But if they're not committed to stamping out racism, then it's going to continue. It's been that way since it was the People's Department under Lincoln. It's that way through Civil War. It's all the way up through Reconstruction, and it's going on now. I believe that the planter class mindset during the plantation era is exactly the same mindset that goes on now. And it's in the hands of the Dixiecrat, the powerful people who hold the pen. And so, yeah, I'll get on my soapbox, but those are some things I think that, for me at least, show that racism is alive and well in DC. And because the USDA has devolved its responsibility, I can be a county committee person out here in Lone Grove, Texas, and I can screw over a black farmer. And you know what's going to happen to me? Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I am going to get paid. I'm going to retire, and I'm going to move on into retirement. And the black farmer that I screwed over, good chance he's going to lose his land and everything that goes with it. So, yeah.
And Dr. West, to add to that, the one thing that came out of the research and out of the leadership of the Clinton administration and presently is the fact that the county committee system is one of the major problems that has kept black farmers from getting programs and services. This administration today said that they were going to go in and look at the county committee system and do something about the problem. They had the opportunity to put that on their agenda. They have moved it off the agenda and don't plan to do anything about it. The other part of that is that Office of General Counsel. The Office of General Counsel is supposed to advise, who is the officials who advise the Department of Agriculture. But the point is, they control civil rights from pillar to post, from the employees all the way to black farmers. They are the major problem, and that is two of the things that need to be fixed at USDA. And I think Stovall touched on that as well.
Yeah, because on the one hand, no, go jump right ahead, brother Mike.
Well, the county committee people are voted in. They're not paid by the government at all. Those are farmers in the community to make determination who gets a loan and who doesn't get a loan. So they're not employees of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So they can look at your land and see that you in default or close to being in default and deny your loan and get your land because they're part of the good old boy system that's a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. See, the county committee is not getting paid. They voted in they send you a voter registration of who's they looking at making part of the county committee. See, so they're not employees of the USDA. They just regular farmers like me. You got more white farmers than you do black farmers, so automatically the white farmers gonna vote their buddies in. See, because especially if they're looking at some land down the street and they know it's going to come be a foreclosure. So it's all a good old boy system. And then it's up to the loan officer to prove the loan on time enough for this farmer to continue to farm. And if your loan, you put in a loan in December before planting time and planting time in March, you might not get a loan approved until August. Planting time is late and over. And you get a less amount than you really applied for anyway. And the only thing you can take out of there is living expense. You done lost another year of crop. The same thing they doing with these farmers when they approved this $5 billion and they said that they was gonna pay these farmer debts. We signed a contract Every black farmer signed a contract with the federal government to erase their debt off the books. Then they turn around, these white farmers filed a lawsuit against that, and they put it on hold. Then they went back to Congress and passed another bill and said they're gonna make this money appropriate to all farmers. See, that's how that lawsuit was filed through John Boyd and Ben Crump. John Boyd just didn't file that lawsuit properly because it was a breach of contract. And if he would have had enough farmers that had those contracts and brought them in there and filed that lawsuit properly, that lawsuit would still be going on. And I know a lot of these farmers do things undercover to try to get their stuff settled, okay? And they file things fraudulently, knowing it wasn't right when they filed it. Now, Ben Crump is too powerful lawyer to not make sure that lawsuit was filed properly, because it was a breach of settlement agreement. You had thousands of farmers that signed that agreement. I got one myself. And they only gave me partial debt relief, and they ran me out of business 20-something years ago. I've been fighting this issue for 30 years. With cows they killed, put me in jail, brought me up on animal cruelty charges. Look how many farmers been hung in the field and took in their land and tractors. This is what they do. And we got a lot of black people that looks like us. All black folks ain't our kin folks. That's what the young lady said in the Black Lives Movement. She told the truth. We got a lot of black people that sold black farmers out across the United States of America. They get money to be quiet. We got farmers, a big people, activists said I got thousands of members. And long as he can get on television and talk about what he has, how many members he has, and they give him a little money, he go away for a while. We got a lot of people like that, and the black farmers still suffering now here in the United States of America and still not getting justice. I don't have to call no names. We have a lot of people out there in the civil rights movement that then screwed over the black farmers for many, many years. And black farmers still suffering today because of that. And we need justice for these black farmers. These farmers need to be paid according to what they lost, not just what they want to give. This thing is so big and embedded in this country, is unbelievable, and they're going to steady take land. It's just like they're giving partial debt relief, and you can run this farmer out of business. And the only way they're going to give you debt relief, you get on television and talk about what they're doing to you. And Biden administration, he put Bill Sapp in there, and he's the racist man in the country. He worse than Trump. And he turned around and still foreclosing on black farmers' land. It's all about taking that wealth from black. If they can take that wealth from you, they can keep you voting democratically. And that's all it's about, to keep their foot on your neck, to keep you down and needing them, and they're going to give you a token and don't never push it through. It's like they voted all these bills in, and ain't nobody upholding the bills, and ain't nobody holding the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they steady discriminating against black farmers across the United States and steady taking land. It's criminal what the Justice Department allow the USDA to do to these black farmers, including me. And we need something done big about this problem. It's more than the county committee. It's the whole systemic racism in this culture, in this country of the USDA. It's embedded.
So Dr. West, the USDA is not friend of black farmers. That's well established. And Michael is saying that better than anybody I know. On the other hand, Congress has not done a really good job on behalf of black farmers, because Congress has passed bills that are not really being implemented over at the USDA. When Congress passes a bill that a black farmer should be paid 120%, 100% debt relief and 20% taxes, and then the Ag Secretary slow walks it, listens to the bank, that allows 12 class action suits of white farmers around the country to do their thing, led by one of President Trump's legal advisors, a guy that I'm blanking on his name right now, but a district court in Texas and a district court in Florida called a halt to the dissemination of all those funds under the American Rescue Plan Act. And then they come along with the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's gone from Black farmers under the Justice for Black Farmers Act and under ARPA. Now we're talking socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And now under Inflation Reduction Act, we're talking about distressed borrowers. So it's got, notice how we've watered down. And there's a side piece that Lawrence and I could go on forever about, but we thought we were working in a healthy kind of give and take way with the Biden-Harris transition team, the way that we had worked with Senator Warren as she was developing her policy. But little did we know until we knew it, right, Lawrence, that Vilsack was in the background as the grand puppeteer controlling what was going on. And there was a distinct come to Jesus meeting that happened one day when one of the lawyers for the transition team said, and we have it in quotes, in bold, in our notes, what you're asking for on behalf of Black farmers is unconstitutional.
Got it.
Then we see what the federal, what the Supreme Court has done. We see how it's been watered down. And then under IRA, 3.1 billion was to be given away to alleviate debts of distressed borrowers. Now we know about 10 or 11 Black farmers who've had their debts partially or completely alleviated. That's out of like 17,000 farmers. Like, so why is it that more Black farmers like Michael and others that we know aren't getting debt relief? Because USDA is giving money hand over fist, or whatever that expression is, to white farmers, but they are not giving it to minority farmers or Black farmers. And then secondly, there is $2.2 billion that has been allocated for discrimination. But because the pool of white farmers has been tossed into that mix, it's really watered down the pool. And so, number one, it says it's going to be easy. Number two, they say you don't need an attorney. Number three, they say there's going to be a $500,000 max and don't expect anything more than that. And oh, by the way, there is no appeals process.
Oh,
So
And
if
no
they
economist.
give you $25,000 for discrimination, you either take it or leave it. Who ever heard of any lawsuit not having an appeals process? But it gets even worse, Dr. West, because the USDA is paying $1 million or so to an administrator, to 2 pubs, to 8 cooperators to take care of all of the farmers and their complaints across this country. Now, I wrote an article on my blog about this. One thing that I did say is that I'm a pretty active blogger, which gets me in trouble at times. But I did a blog on this particular piece of legislation and how it's being handled under Vilsack and the USDA. And they say it's an easy process. So I go in and I look at that application document. It is 5 pages with multiple lines, and you must do this, you must do this, you must do this, you may do this. And I'm thinking, they say this is going to be easy and you're not going to need an attorney. What I think they're doing is they're setting up Black farmers in rural America to throw their hands up and just say, forget about it, because that process is not easy. That process, they say, does not need an attorney. That process, they say, has no appeals process. That process has a max of $500,000. And you tell me that the damages that the USDA has done to that man in the upper right-hand corner of the screen is worth just $500,000 or less. And if he gets $50, he's supposed to go settle for it. There's no appeals process. Those are crying, racist, shameful things that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is doing to the people of our land. And that's racism at its finest. And he's violating the law, because it's like I said the other day, I don't trust Tom Vilsack to distribute all these funds. And I really don't trust whoever Vilsack has appointed to distribute these funds. And Michael said it the other night real well. There is no indication that we have that there is an ag economist at any point along the way. So you're going to settle with a guy like Michael Stovall, and you're not going to have an ag economist to try to figure out what his real damages and his real losses are. Tell me what's right about that, Dr. West. It's not right.
Absolutely.
Period. End of discussion.
No, but I hear you. I mean, it seems to me that, you know, when I say, ask myself the question and ask you all implicitly, what can be done on an institutional level, on a structural level, both at the presidential register, but also as a moment in a movement. Because see, the campaign for me is just a moment in a movement. It's just a spilling over of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker in the electoral political system. So in that sense, it's not ordinary politics. It has to do with a certain kind of prophetic calling. It has something to do with a certain kind of witness that you bear that puts a premium on the least of these coming out of the 25th chapter of Matthew. Now, what form does that take? Well, you have to look at these county committees that look at these loans. All of a sudden, if that's coming from the community, then either they have a wholesale accountability where you criminalize the discrimination.
Yes.
If you can show the discrimination, which could be shown, then you bring in the law. There has to be a legal accountability so people can see they got to pay a price. It's not revenge. We're still talking about justice, but they have to pay a price as long as they can get away with it with no accountability, no answerability. That becomes itself so normalized that you end up with the wholesale toxic system that Brother Michael's talking about.
Dr. West, another good point. In March of this year, March 1st, farmers from all over the southern region and these United States, they came from the north, they came from the east, they came from the south and the Midwest, and they demonstrated in front of the White House to show and bring to the attention of the American people of their concerns about the continued racism and bias at USDA. One of the biggest problems that Stovall mentioned also, our leadership and our Black leadership has not done what it is supposed to do in order to protect and make sure that accountability is being held at USDA for those who discriminate against Black farmers, and they have not been supporting the legislation to demand that Vilsack pay Black farmers the same way he's paid white farmers. And I'm talking about the monies that is sitting there that he has not used for the purpose that's there for Black farmers, and our congressional representatives are not doing what they're supposed to do. And Black farmers came to Washington on March 1st that would support you and others who would take on this challenge or this daunting task of breaking the backbone of what we call at USDA the last plantation.
And there were some incredible things that we carried, Dr. West, some political satire developed by a guy out of Los Angeles, California. So if you want to know what that protest looked like and some of the things that we carried and some of the things we said, we'll get the links to you. They were riveting. When we say the last plantation, there's a political satire. Another one that somebody carried was, we gave you the White House, you gave us Tom Vilsack.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's powerful.
That is.
Powerful.
Let me also bring this. Let me bring this in. When we met on March the 1st, Dr. Wester, but we met with Booker, and he made it clear. I asked him a question about these cases that excels more than 500,000, they could be settled in the civil rights office because the statute of limitation has been lifted. And I told him, I said, well, that's the way these cases need to move forward. I said, because a lot of these cases excel. If you've been in farm at any time, you done lost and been discriminated against for 20, 30, 40 years, you done lost more than $500,000.
That's right.
And you should be compensated based on the losses that you occurred. And he didn't deny it. And he said legislation said 500,000, but it did lift the statute on these cases, and they can be resolved in the civil rights office. And I said, well, my case is still in statute. Well, your case can be settled as well. My case was never out of statute. They just didn't resolve it. And I met with Lloyd Wright, and my attorney met with Lloyd Wright back here during the time that he was in there, and he still didn't settle my case after they breached the settlement agreement. Okay. When I settled my case in January 20th of 1998, I came home and I agreed to accept the inventory farm. This was on the list. It was 197 acres. On January 21st, I called back to Washington, D.C., agreed to accept that farm because that was part of my settlement agreement. 3 weeks later, they sold that farm, auctioned it off, and sold it off for nothing. That's when my trouble started. And Lloyd Wright never did enforce the settlement agreement. So there's a lot of people that looks like me and you that didn't do the right thing for Black farmers. And it's sad to say, and it's all across the United States because people out there are taking money. They put over $75 million in these hubs. They hand-picked these hubs and put 75 million. I talked to Zach Dushman. He part of the USDA. He said he knows 9 farmers that over, he said that 9 farmers got over $2 billion of damages. That's exactly what he told me.
Wow, wow. And no
So that lets
transparency,
you know,
no accountability at all. They just walked off.
yes, no economist, no nothing. But see, Goldman lost 2,000 acres of land. Zach Dushman's father lost several thousand acres of land, several 800 acres of land. I don't know how many it was. See, they part of that system because all the money that they can save, the USDA, don't come to them 9 farmers. It's all a good old boy system to hush the Black farmers, take their land, and run them out of business because you're landless, you're homeless. And that's the topic. That's what's out there. If you don't have land, you can't feed yourself. You can't leave the next generation no wealth. So you're still in poverty. And the way the interest rates are going up and the price of land and houses today, they putting us back in slavery without us even realizing it. That's how bad it is. And I fought the Black leaders for selling us out. A lot of these cases that settled in the 90s, should have brought a whole lot more money. You know how much they settled my case? $156,000. After taking several farms, killing my cows, and had in the settlement agreement, if I sued I could not sue the police department for intervening and killing and selling, robbing my cows and auctioning them off. That was part of my settlement agreement.
That was part of the settlement itself.
And I never got paid for the land that they taken from me. So it's ongoing, and we have Black leaders that's supposed to be doing something for us. They're not doing what they should do for these Black farmers. If it were, we wouldn't be in the situation 20, 30 years later, still fighting the same problem. And it's worse now than it was before Pickford even came about.
Wow.
Because land prices have increased so much. The average farm today, costs more than $10,000 an acre. If you find it cheaper than that, you blessed.
Wow. Well, I think, I tell you this though, as this campaign goes on though, that anytime an issue of Black farmers comes up, I hope and pray you all would be available to bring your voices to bear, because that's the important thing. To come out of the traditional anthem, lift every voice. Well, you got to have the real voices. We ain't talking about the echoes tied to the silos that are sell out. We talking about the voices committed to truth and justice. And to have your voices, not just now, but in this process. Because I can tell you, Judith, if and when I win, I'm going to do some things that probably get my head cut off. But one crucial thing is we're going to have voices like yourselves that are concerned about all of this kind of discrimination and degradation and unaccountability and lack of responsibility when it comes to those on high. But when it comes to everyday folk, we're supposed to take all responsibility. I want you to be responsible, work harder. Hey, we've been working for many generations. And so I just hope and pray that this is really just one moment and a beginning, because as we continue to move, I'm just going to need folk to, one, keep me accountable, keep me instructed, because you can see how ignorant I am in terms of so many different things, and also inspire, because more than anything else, you all are inspiring. You've been through hell and high water, and you still got fire in your soul, fire in your bones. That makes a difference. That makes a fundamental difference. It really does, very much so. I mentioned before, I'm starting in Mississippi in Jackson, August the 25th, at the Emmett Till Day with the Emmett Till family, because I just think it's very important that that the campaign really be fundamentally associated from where I come from. And I am a Black, countrified, ruified Black Baptist out of Mississippi, not geographically, but my pastor was from Mississippi, Shiloh Baptist. And so I want to begin there with a larger vision of the world. But Black farmers are a fundamental part of that vision of the world. Militarism abroad, Wall Street, Pentagon, all the different issues, ecological collapse, issues of patriarchy. You were talking about feminism, making sure that everybody is treated equally, having an equal status in the eyes of God, but also recognizing that, and usually in all that conversation, there's not a whole lot of talk about Black farmers. And of course, you know, just a few years ago that Black folk, 95% of us come out of the South, rural, country, what I call gut bucket sophistication. That's where Black culture comes from. Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, Florida, and so forth. You see. Then we make our move to Detroit, Chicago, or DC, and I made it to California with Mom and Dad and so on. You see. And so I'm just hoping, though, Brother Bryce and Brother Nathan and all three of y'all, you brought here together, that we continue this conversation as we move. Is that all right, though, y'all?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thumbs up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I lost my livelihood in farming. I couldn't farm. They took away the one thing that I really loved, and that was farming. That's what the USDA did.
He showed me a big tarp that had the words on it, "Nigger, go home."
The lack of commitment by too many people to not really caring whether we did justice or not.
Even as long as it's been, you know, we've experienced discrimination for a very, very long time, and most people would have given up. To this date, I haven't given up, and I never will give up, you know, until justice is served.
That's what my daddy would always say. He says I wasn't in trouble or anything. Everything was fine until I went up to defend my dad. And he says, what was I supposed to do? He says, I'm a man, and that's my daddy. I'm supposed to defend him.
He said, don't let USDA take my land. It was like anybody else, but just don't you let them have it. And we've done that. Nobody else has taken it either, but for sure the USDA will never get it.
Quite frankly, I say that the United States Department of Agriculture murdered
them.
My mother and father and my brother. Mm-hmm.